poser. Like, who in their right mind would even wear that to school? She's pretty much begging to get bullied, if you ask me.
Are you talking about me?
What if I am? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna fight me because you're so manly? After all, that's pretty much all boys do. What I'm wondering is what made you think it's okay to dress like that? Like a guy. You're obviously a girl, so just go put on a dress or something. What? So now you think you can act all cold and tough and manly and ignore me? You think you're so much better just because you act like a guy.
What's so wrong with me dressing like a guy? Huh? Does it negatively affect you in any way? No, I didn't think so. It's embarrassing that, mentally you're still stuck in the 50s. But you still think that all women should just stay in the kitchen and help their kids. You know that you can't act, dress, or talk like a certain gender? And there's a construct, dude. I actually pity you. I can't imagine how hard it is living a life full of ignorance.
Gender is a social construct which today's society has finally started to break down. Everyone is free to act and dress as they please, as clothes and characteristics aren't limited to a certain gender. However, the imposition of gender roles in Shakespeare's Macbeth contradicts the efforts of today's society. Shakespeare demonstrates the significance of gender roles as a construct in Macbeth through the influence it has on the character's mentality, morality, and behavior. Shakespeare shows how the imposition of gender roles can negatively affect one's mentality, resulting in tragic consequences. Constantly conforming to be somebody you're not can be very difficult. This is seen through Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, who face multiple issues, all caused by forced gender stereotypes. In Macbeth, women are characterized as gentle, skittish, and frail. Lady Macbeth is constantly seen trying to break free of this stereotype. In the beginning of the play, she expresses her hatred for her gender and its oppressing stereotypes. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my women's breast and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers. Sadly for her, Lady Macbeth never rid herself of her womanly emotions, which eventually induced her demise. After she had seen Duncan dead, her mind began to rot with guilt until she could no longer live with this guilt, resulting in her taking her own life. Had Lady Macbeth been a man, or had a man's traditional traits, she would have been able to cope with what she had seen. Contrasting Lady Macbeth's development of masculine emotions to feminine emotions is Macbeth. When first faced with his dilemma to kill or not to kill, Macbeth despised the idea of him murdering a righteous king, but Lady Macbeth berated him into committing murder by questioning his masculinity and identity as a man. What beast was it, then, that made you break this enterprise to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man, and to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. This compelled Macbeth to believe that the key to becoming a worthy man was through violence and acts of aggression. Due to this mentality, Macbeth begins his killing sprees, each death more unnecessary than the last. This merciless killing rampage is what eventually led to his downfall, as all of the Thanes eventually overthrew him. Had Macbeth been confident in his gender, he would have never desired to validate his masculinity by killing Duncan. It's interesting, because Lady Macbeth constantly scorned and belittled Macbeth for his unmanly actions, her constant humiliation fueled by her jealousy. Being a man, Macbeth could kill, each murder being justified simply because of his gender. Lady Macbeth struggled with this, as she wished she could be evil, but her femininity thwarted her. Both of these characters struggled to conform to the stereotypes of their gender, but once they did, they were doomed. In the end, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth were destroyed by their toxic mentality, the idea that they had to conform to their gender's detrimental stereotypes.
In Shakespeare's Macbeth, society's traditional masculine characteristics are demonstrated as being brave, violent, cold, hard, and strong. Shakespeare's purpose behind this representation of these specific gender traits are that the culture of violence that emerges through war can be fabricated by society into a social dynamic. as a sort of way to cope with those challenges. Violence does not in and of itself represent masculinity, but due to the fact that men were the ones to be sent off to war, society constructed this idea that in order to be a man, these characteristics of violence and courage had to be actively present. An example of this is when Duncan was commending Macbeth for his violent killing of the treacherous Irish invaders. King Duncan asks who the person in front of him is, but Shakespeare is also establishing the connection between bloodiness and manliness. After that bloody man tells the harrowing story of how Macbeth, with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution, met an enemy on the battlefield and brutally unseamed him from the nave to the chops and fixed his head upon our battlements. Act 1, Scene 2, lines 17 to 23. King Duncan responds with a commendation of Macbeth's nobility and masculinity. "O valiant cousin, worthy gentleman!" Act 1, Scene 2, line 24. It's not only manly to fight brutally in war, it's gentlemanly.
In Macbeth, not only does Shakespeare use certain characteristics to stereotype men's behavior, but women's as well, building the idea that women are fragile, weak, skittish, and nurturing. For example, when Duncan was brutally murdered, Lady Macbeth was shielded by Macduff.
O gentle lady, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak. The repetition in a woman's ear would murder as it fell.
Due to her womanliness, she could not even hear the announcement of Duncan's death, let alone see his massacred corpse. Macduff believes that he is helping Lady Macbeth when he says this, but in reality, he is not. Even if he never intended it to be, he is making it known that she is less than him because he is a man and she is not. He is enforcing the idea that due to Lady Macbeth's gender, she cannot handle the news of death because she is weak. The idea that women are so weak that she could not even hear about the news of death is interesting. Had Lady Macbeth been a man, she would have been able to at least hear of the awful news of Duncan's death. However, this is a perfect example of dramatic irony, as the audience recognizes that Lady Macbeth is the mastermind behind Duncan's downfall. Lady Macbeth has to conceal her true unwomanly actions and intentions to maintain her and Duncan's innocence. In a way, her womanly behavior is key to her disguise. Nobody would ever suspect a dainty, feeble, skittish woman to viciously murder Duncan.
The idea that gender determines behavior would certainly not stand in a generation as fluid as our own, and a society as advanced as ours. Gender roles have been a topic of controversy for centuries. Even today, there are people who have the audacity to insist that your gender must determine how you behave. There are several behavioral terms that correlate with gender, with terms such as ladylike to describe someone proper, meek, and obedient, or someone manly to describe strong, brave, and tough. If you could replace these terms with more modernly appropriate synonyms, would you? It's too bad that the English dictionary does not update like our phones do, or else these sexist ideologies and terms in the English language would have been erased from ours years ago. Gender is fluid. This has been proven with several modern developments in jobs and areas of work, because women can do what men have previously believed was too hard for them as weak females. Shakespeare emphasizes the profound influence that gender roles seem to play on an individual's sense of morality throughout the play, especially in terms of his characters trying to justify their violent, immoral actions. Men were considered the superior gender. Therefore, whatever pseudo-idea of morality they fabricate and consider to be sound will be considered gospel by the rest of society as well. When Lady Macbeth mocks her husband for saying he dare not kill his king, Act 1, Scene 7, line 44, he responds with an attempt to gender morality as masculine.
I dare do all that may become a man.
Who dares to do more is none. Act 1, Scene 7, line 46 to 47. What Macbeth cares about is being a man, and that will be his downfall, because he's only trying to justify his immoral actions with society's gender-influenced, fabricated morality. He is willing to do everything, all, that is manly. Those who deceive and murder, he thinks, are not immoral, as much as they are simply just unmanly. But then his wife reconfigures his understanding of the relationship between morality and masculinity. When you durst do it, you were a man. And to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. Act 1, Scene 7, line 49 to 51. For Lady Macbeth, murder is manlier than honor, and Macbeth accepts this redefinition of masculinity after Lady Macbeth lays out the details of the assassination plot. Bring forth men, children only, he says, for thy undaunted mettle should compose nothing but males. Act 1, Scene 7, line 72 to 74. Lady Macbeth is capable of bending Macbeth's convoluted sense of gender morality solely due to the fact that what he wants and what he needs is to convince himself that his actions are considered moral for a gentleman. And so, his crime will now simply be configured to that belief. Because the idea that man equals good morality is just a social construct. Man is not a synonym of noble, good, or moral in any sense of the word. It's upsetting, but justifying actions with the excuse of privilege and power, namely gender, is not something new. Just nowadays, the circumstances don't usually involve treason and sword fights. The saying, boys will be boys, is similarly a common dismissal of poor actions, thoughts, and behaviors of men that I'm 100% sure has been heard by anyone. Modernly, do you believe that it's reasonable to justify immorality with nothing but a gender construct? Surely a basic lack of ignorance would inspire you to disagree and understand that gender has no correlation with good morals, as is so clearly seen through Macbeth himself.
It's very interesting to compare the significance of gender in the era of Macbeth and in today's society. In Macbeth, each gender has their own stereotypical traits which they must abide by. However, in today's society, gender is fluid. Women do not have to conform to the stereotype of being nurturing, kind, feeble, and skittish. The idea that women are less than men and must live to serve them has finally been demolished. Women are also no longer expected to bear children for men, and are now free to do what they please with their bodies. Not only has the dismissal of gender norms helped women, but men as well. Men are no longer forced to fit the cold, hard, violent, and strong stereotype that was enforced in Macbeth. Today's society is all about destroying toxic masculinity, which is the idea that men have to fit those stereotypes and cannot show emotion or cry.
Nowadays, jobs, fashion, and different communities such as the LGBTQ+, are all trying to separate these constructs, these gender roles, from love, behavior, and overall appearance. There are even certain individuals who choose to separate themselves from the idea of gender at all. These people identify with different pronouns and separate themselves from gender roles. These people are known as non-binary. This contrast of gender norms in Macbeth and today's society truly demonstrates the impact when gender roles are more enforced into society and how they can affect mentality, morality, and behavior. To conclude, gender is just a social construct with zero correlation with the correct mentality, morality, or behavior. Throughout Macbeth, it's clear to see the significantly more negative influence that these enforced gender roles have on society and the main characters, and how it affects the plot and themes that Shakespeare demonstrates throughout his entire play.